She had kept every letter, 23 of them, tied with a length of brown cord and stored in a cedar box beneath her bed. And in 20 years, she had never once considered throwing them away. Not when the news came that he had married. Not when the years settled into a quiet she had made her peace with. Not when Clara asked her once, carefully, and only once, whether she had thought about moving on. Ada Holt had kept every letter because they were the truest thing anyone had ever said to her. And the fact that he did not know he had said them to her did not make them less true. It only made them hers in a way nothing else had ever been. Before we go any further, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay until the end. What was written in those letters and what happened to the message that was supposed to explain them will stay with you long after the story is done. Garrett Cade was 22 years old when Maverick Holt hired him, and he was the kind of young man whose defining quality was so fundamental to his nature that most people who knew him could not have named it as a quality at all. They would have simply said he was Garrett, as though that were sufficient description. And for the people who knew him well enough, it was. What Garrett was, specifically, was loyal. Not loyal in the perform sense of a man who announces his allegiances and expects recognition for them. Loyal in the structural sense. Once he had decided that a person or a cause deserved his commitment, he gave it completely and without reservation, and without the periodic renegotiation that most people applied to their devotions. He had grown up in the modest circumstances of a family that had more character than property, and he had spent his early years following whoever seemed most worth following, which had led him through several interesting and occasionally inadvisable associations before he arrived at the conclusion that what he was actually looking for was not adventure, but meaning. He wanted to give his loyalty to something that deserved it. Maverick Holt found him on a Thursday in the spring, and the hiring was straightforward. Maverick was a powerful man in the Amber Ridge territory, a land baron of the old frontier school who had built his holdings through sustained effort and the specific patience of a man who understood that real power accumulated quietly rather than announced itself. He had one daughter, Ada, who was 20 years old and enrolled at the Amber Ridge finishing school, and who her father worried about with the particular intensity of a man whose protective instincts had no other outlet. He needed someone to accompany Ada to and from the school and to her various engagements around the territory. He needed someone honest and capable and completely trustworthy. He needed, in short, someone exactly like Garrett Cade, and the interview lasted 15 minutes and ended with a handshake and Garrett reporting to the Holt property the following Monday morning. Ada Holt was not consulted about the arrangement. This was apparent from the first morning when Garrett arrived at the front of the Holt house at precisely the hour Maverick had specified, and Ada came through the door with the expression of a woman who has been informed of a decision made about her life without her input, and has chosen to express her objection through the specific eloquence of sustained silence. She was tall, with dark eyes and the kind of composed bearing that comes from education applied to natural intelligence, and she looked at Garrett Cade standing at the gate of her father's property with the expression of someone assessing an inconvenience they have been instructed to tolerate. She said good morning with the precise warmth of a woman who is raised with manners and is currently annoyed that they apply. Garrett said good morning back and fell into step beside her, and that was the beginning of an arrangement that Ada found infuriating and Garrett found entirely natural, because he had been hired to protect her, and protecting her was what he was going to do. The infuriation was consistent and specific. He was at the school gate when she arrived. He was at the school gate when she left. When she attended social functions, he stood at a respectful but visible distance that somehow managed to be both unobtrusive and omnipresent simultaneously. When she rode out with friends, he rode at the edge of the party without inserting himself into any conversation and without ever being far enough away to be genuinely ignorable. He was simply always there, and Ada had been managing her own affairs for long enough that always there felt like a commentary on her competence that she had not requested and did not appreciate. Clara noticed the dynamic from the beginning. Clara had been Ada's closest friend since they were 12 years old, and had the gift of a woman who sees clearly and chooses carefully what to do with what she sees. She was warm and perceptive, and had spent enough time in Ada's company to understand the difference between what Ada said and what Ada meant, which was a distinction that required considerable attention because Ada was articulate and precise, and rarely said anything she did not mean. And yet, there was always something underneath the precision that the precision itself was covering. She watched Ada watch Garrett from the school gate on a Tuesday afternoon, and she said nothing. She filed it away. She was good at filing things away. The letters began in October, 6 months after Garrett's hiring, and they began as a prank. Ada had learned Garrett's postbox number through the school's administrative office, where he had registered as the protective party for her enrollment. And she sat at her writing desk on a rainy Wednesday evening with the specific, mischievous intention of a woman who has decided that if she cannot make her inconvenience disappear, she can at least have some entertainment at its expense. She invented a name. She invented a personality to go with the name. She wrote a letter that was designed to suggest a secret admirer, to distract him, to occupy his attention with something other than her movements between school and home. She dropped it in his postbox on Thursday morning on her way past the general store. He collected it Friday afternoon. He wrote back on Saturday. She received his reply Monday. She had not expected him to write back. She had not expected the reply to be what it was. Garrett Cade wrote the way he did everything, which was directly and without performance. His letter was not elaborate. It was not poetic. It was simply honest in the specific way of a man who has no reason to be anything else when speaking to a stranger he cannot see. He said he had received her letter and was uncertain of its intention, but that he would respond genuinely because any other response seemed like a waste of both their time. He said he spent most of his days watching out for someone else and found it satisfying in the way that purposeful work is satisfying, and occasionally lonely in the way that work which does not allow for real connection tends to be. He said he did not know who she was and did not require her to tell him, and would write again if she chose to write again. Ada sat with the letter for a long time. Then she wrote again. She told herself it was still the prank. She was extending the entertainment. She was testing how long he would correspond before the thing collapsed. She was not doing what she was actually doing, which was writing to the man who walked beside her every morning with the specific freedom of a woman speaking to someone who did not know her name or her face or her father's name or anything about the life she was performing every day. And finding that freedom felt like the first full breath she had taken in longer than she could accurately account for. Clara knew about the letters from the third week. Ada told her because Ada told Clara most things, and because keeping it entirely private felt like it would make it into something larger than it was. Clara listened to the account of the prank with the composed attention of someone who has already identified the point at which the prank stopped being a prank and is choosing not to say so yet. She asked to read one of the letters. Ada showed her the fourth one. Clara read it and set it down and said, "He writes honestly." Ada said, "It is a useful quality in a correspondent." Clara said, "It is a useful quality in a person." She said it plainly and moved on to another subject, and Ada understood what she meant and did not address it, because addressing it would require acknowledging things she was not ready to acknowledge. The letters continued through November and into December, and then through the winter and into the spring, and by the time the snow had left the Amber Ridge ridgeline, the correspondence had developed into something that had no honest name except the obvious one. Garrett wrote about his work, about the territory, about the things he had read and the things he thought about them, about the specific quality of loyalty and whether it was a choice or a nature, about the kind of life he wanted to build when the time came to build one. Ada wrote about her education and her father and the frontier, and the difference between the life she was living and the life she was thinking about, and the specific frustration of being a capable woman in a world that kept offering her arrangements rather than choices. They wrote about everything except who they were. He did not ask. She did not offer. The anonymity had become the condition of the honesty, and they both understood that naming it would change it, and neither of them was ready for it to change. What Ada had not calculated was what happened inside her every morning when she came through the front door of the Holt house, and Garrett fell into step beside her. She had been treating him as the inconvenience for so long that treating him differently felt like admitting something she was not ready to admit. But she began to notice things she had not noticed before, or had noticed and refused to process. The way he was attentive without being intrusive, the way he handled situations that required handling with the quiet efficiency of a man who has no interest in being seen handling them, the way he answered her direct questions directly and her indirect questions with a patience that suggested he understood what she was actually asking and was choosing to respond to both the surface and the depth simultaneously. She noticed and filed it away, and kept writing the letters, and kept walking beside him in the mornings, and kept the two things entirely separate in the architecture of her daily life, and the walls between them were getting thinner, and she knew it and did not address it. Lydia Lane had been part of their circle since the finishing school's second year. She was warm and genuine, with the specific quality of a woman who is comfortable in the background and has made her peace with it, who provides the kind of steady friendship that does not require reciprocal drama and does not ask to be the center of anything. She was Ada's friend in the real and abiding sense, the kind of friend who shows up without being summoned and stays without needing to be asked, and notices what you are not saying without requiring you to say it. She had watched the Garrett situation develop from its beginning, with the same attention she brought to everything in Ada's life, and she had her own observations about it, which she kept to herself, because they were her observations and not Ada's invitation. She had seen Garrett from a distance many times. She had never spoken to him directly. She had watched him walk beside Ada every morning, with the specific attentiveness of a man whose loyalty was not professional in its origin, even if it was professional in its expression. And she had filed that observation away and said nothing about it to anyone. Maverick Holt was not a suspicious man by nature. He was a thorough man, which is a different quality, and thoroughness applied to the observation of his daughter and her assigned protector produced in him by midsummer an unease he could not fully articulate but could not dismiss. He had noticed the way Garrett looked for Ada in a crowd before he had been instructed to look. He had noticed the way Garrett's attentiveness had a quality to it that exceeded professional requirement without crossing any line he could specifically identify. He called Ada to his study on a Tuesday evening and told her what he had noticed, and said he was concerned that Garrett had developed feelings for her, and that he believed Garrett was planning to meet someone at the Amber Ridge train station on Friday, and that he suspected that someone was Ada. Ada sat across her father's desk and looked at him with the composed expression she had inherited from her mother, and managed the conversation with the specific precision of a woman who is doing several things simultaneously. She told her father he was wrong. She told him Garrett was meeting a girl from town, someone he had been corresponding with, nothing to do with Ada at all. She invented the details with the fluency of someone who has been writing fiction twice a week for 8 months and has gotten very good at it. Maverick looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, satisfied, and the conversation ended, and Ada went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed, and felt the specific cold of a woman who has just protected someone at significant cost to herself, and now has to figure out what to do about the problem she has created. The problem was this. Garrett was, in fact, planning to go to the train station on Friday. Ada knew this because she had written to him the previous week and suggested it, finally, after 8 months of letters, that they meet. She had not told him who she was. She had suggested only a time and a place, and the cedar box beneath her bed currently held his reply, which said he would be there, and that he had been thinking about this meeting for longer than he had allowed himself to say. Now her father believed a girl from town was meeting Garrett at the station. If Garrett arrived at the station and nobody was there, the fiction would collapse. She needed someone to go to the station in her place and deliver a message. She needed someone she trusted completely. She went to Lydia. She explained the situation with the full honesty she brought to conversations with Lydia, which was more honesty than she brought to most other conversations. She told her about the letters. She told her about the meeting. She told her about Maverick's suspicion and the story she had told to protect Garrett. She told Lydia she needed her to go to the station on Friday and find Garrett Cade and tell him that the woman he had been writing to had sent her friend ahead and could not come herself, but wanted him to know she was real and she was genuine, and that she would find a way to explain everything properly very soon. Just deliver the message, Ada said. Tell him I am real, and I will explain. Lydia said she would. She said it with the directness of a woman who means what she says. Ada believed her completely. There was no reason not to. Lydia Lane went to the Amber Ridge train station on Friday afternoon, and she found Garrett Cade on the platform 40 minutes before the afternoon train, and she saw him before he saw her. He was standing near the far end of the platform, with his hat in his hand and his eyes moving across every arriving face, with the specific attention of a man whose entire expectation is pointed toward a door. She had seen Garrett from a distance many times. She had never seen him like this. He was not performing waiting. He was simply entirely present in the way of a man whose whole heart is oriented toward a single possibility, and who has given himself permission, perhaps for the first time, to want something for himself rather than for someone else. Nobody had ever waited for Lydia Lane that way. She had spent her entire life being the woman who arrived at places where other people were being waited for. She stood 20 feet away and watched Garrett Cade wait with his whole heart, and something that had been closed inside her for a very long time opened without her permission. And the message Ada had sent her to deliver was still fully formed in her mind, and she knew exactly what she was supposed to say. And she walked toward him across the platform, and when he turned and saw her, and the hope in his face moved toward her rather than past her, she said the wrong thing. She said she was the one who had been writing to him. She said it before she had fully decided to say it, and then it was in the air between them and could not be retrieved. He looked at her. He looked at her the way he had been looking for a face to match the letters, and she looked back at him with all the wanting of a woman who has made an irreversible decision in a single unguarded moment and is committed to it now, because the alternative is a kind of loss she is not able to sustain. Her hand was in her coat pocket. In her coat pocket was the means by which Ada was going to call to confirm the message had been delivered. She felt it against her fingers. She looked at Garrett. She took it out and looked at it for a moment, and then she placed it on the edge of the platform where the afternoon train would take care of it. And she turned back to Garrett Cade, and she began the life she had decided to have. Ada waited at home. She waited through Friday evening and into Friday night. And by Saturday morning, the specific quality of the silence told her something she did not want to know. Clara came on Saturday afternoon. She came without being summoned, because Clara always knew when to come without being summoned. She sat in Ada's room, and Ada told her what had happened, or rather, what had not happened, the absence of any message, the absence of any word from Lydia. And Clara listened with the expression of a woman who is assembling information she already partially had into a shape she had been hoping would not form. She said, "I will go and find Lydia." She went. She came back 2 hours later and sat across from Ada and said what she had found out, which was that Lydia Lane had been seen at the train station on Friday afternoon in conversation with a young man whose description matched Garrett Cade, and that they had left the station together, and that Lydia had not been home since. Ada sat with that for a long time. Then she sat with it for longer. Clara said nothing because there was nothing to say that Ada had not already arrived at herself. The weeks that followed had the specific quality of something irrevocable, that you keep approaching from different angles, hoping to find the angle from which it looks reversible, and there is no such angle. Ada could have gone to Garrett. She could have told him the truth directly. She could have sent another message, found another way, insisted on the correction. She thought about all of these options with the thoroughness her father had passed to her through inheritance, and she arrived every time at the same place. Whatever Lydia had told Garrett at the station had become the foundation of something that was already being built. To demolish the foundation now was to demolish everything being built on it. And the person who would be most destroyed by that demolition was not Lydia, and was not Ada. It was Garrett Cade, who had been waiting on a platform with his whole heart, and had finally been given what he waited for, even if the thing he had been given was not the thing that was meant for him. She could not do it. She did not go to him. She did not send another message. She let it stand. She let Lydia have what Lydia had taken, because the cost of taking it back was a man who deserved better than to be used as the terrain of two women's unfinished accounting. That was the most honest thing Ada Holt ever did, and it cost her more than anything else in her life. Garrett and Lydia married in the winter. They built a life in Amber Ridge that was genuine, even if its beginning was not. Garrett gave Lydia the same loyalty he gave everything that deserved it, which was complete and without reservation. And Lydia gave Garrett a real and specific love that had not been invented at the train station, even if the moment of its claiming had been. Their son Eli was born in the second year of the marriage, with his father's dark eyes and a temperament that combined his mother's warmth with his father's steadiness, in a way that made people who knew both parents say he had gotten the best of each of them, which was true, and which Lydia received every time it was said, with the specific quality of a woman accepting a compliment that contains something she has not fully earned. Clara appeared in Ada's life throughout those years with the consistency of someone who has decided that a friendship is worth maintaining regardless of the circumstances that test it. She came for Sunday dinners and for the specific occasions that required a friend's presence, and she watched Ada build a quiet life inside the loss she had sustained, and she said nothing about what she knew because saying it served nobody, and because Ada had made her choice, and Clara respected choices, even the ones that cost more than they should. Ada never married. There were men who asked. There were arrangements her father suggested in the earlier years before he accepted that the arrangements were not going to be accepted. There were reasonable and decent men whom Ada treated with complete courtesy and complete unavailability, and who eventually understood that she was not a woman who was going to be convinced by reasonableness alone. What she wanted was not something she was going to find by accepting the available options. She had experienced something real, entirely in writing, entirely without a face attached to it, and the reality of it had calibrated her in a way that made the available options feel like a different kind of transaction entirely. She kept the letters in the cedar box. She did not reread them often. She did not need to. She knew what they said. Lydia fell ill in the 7th year of the marriage. The illness arrived in the specific way of illnesses that mean to be serious, quietly, and with a patience that suggested it had time. She spent the months of it in the reckoning that serious illness produces in people who have been carrying something heavy for a long time, the specific accounting of a woman who understands that the time for carrying is ending and the time for setting down is beginning, whether she is ready for it or not. She wrote the diary for Eli, not for Garrett. She had thought about writing it for Garrett and had decided against it because Garrett was a living person making a living life, and the truth delivered directly to him would require him to make decisions and revisions in real time that she did not have the right to force on him from a deathbed. She wrote it for her son because her son would one day be a man, and a man deserved to know the full truth of where he came from. Not the comfortable version, but the actual one. Because comfortable versions have a way of requiring maintenance, and the truth requires only acceptance. She wrote it over 3 weeks in the specific handwriting of a woman whose hand was less steady than it used to be, but whose intention was absolutely clear. She wrote about the train station. She wrote about the message Ada had asked her to deliver, and the message she had delivered instead. She wrote about the things she had discarded on the platform edge. She wrote about the years of carrying it, and the love she had for Garrett, which was genuine, and which she documented with the honesty of a woman writing for a reader she would never meet. Because honesty for a reader you will never meet is the purest kind. She wrote about Ada Holt. She wrote that Ada had never married. She wrote that she had watched from a careful distance over the years and understood what that meant, and had carried the understanding alongside everything else. She wrote that she was sorry. Not to Garrett. The apology in the diary was to Ada, written to a woman who would probably never read it, offered anyway because the offering was the only form of honesty she had left. She sealed the diary. She gave it to Clara, of all people, with instructions that it be given to Eli when he was old enough to carry what it contained, and with the additional instruction that Clara use her own judgment about whether Eli needed any guidance in understanding what he had read. She chose Clara because Clara already knew most of it, and because Clara had spent decades demonstrating that she could hold difficult information with care and deploy it wisely, and because Lydia Lane, at the end of her life, understood that wisdom was the most valuable thing she had left to arrange. Lydia died in November. Garrett grieved with the full loyalty of a man whose commitment does not diminish because its object is gone. He raised Eli with the same complete attention he had given everything that deserved it, and Eli grew up knowing that his father was the most honest man he had ever met, and understanding that honesty as both a gift and a standard. Clara came to Garrett's house twice in the months after Lydia's death, and both times she came with food and stayed long enough to be useful and said nothing that required a response. She was managing something she was not yet ready to deploy, and she was waiting for the right moment with the patience of a woman who has learned that the right moment for difficult truths is not the first available moment, but the one that arrives when the person receiving the truth has enough stability to receive it without being destroyed by it. Eli Cade was 22 years old on the evening he opened the diary. His mother had been dead for 10 years. Clara had given him the diary on his 20th birthday with the instruction that he open it when he felt ready, and he had carried it for 2 years without opening it because he understood instinctively that ready was not a feeling that was going to arrive on its own. And eventually, he decided that waiting for ready was its own kind of avoidance, and he sat down at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening and opened it. He read it in one sitting. He read it the way his father read things, completely and without distraction. And when he finished, he sat at the table in the specific silence of a person who has just received information that restructures everything they thought they understood about the story of their own life. He sat there until the lamp burned low. Then he went to find his father. Garrett read the diary at the age of 51, at the same kitchen table where his son had read it the night before. He read it slowly. He read every word. He did not rush any part of it. He read his late wife's handwriting, describing the train station and the decision and the discarded means of communication and the years of carrying the weight of it. He read her love for him, which was real and which she had documented with the specific honesty of a woman, writing for a reader she would never encounter, because that was the only reader she could be entirely honest with. He read her description of Ada Holt. He read that Ada had never married. He set the diary on the table. He sat with what it contained for a very long time. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the Amber Ridge morning was doing what Amber Ridge mornings did in October, arriving slowly and without drama, with the specific golden light of a season that knows it is ending and is at peace with that knowledge. Eli was at the table across from him. He had his mother's eyes and his father's way of being present without pressing. He waited. Garrett looked at the diary. He looked at his son. He said, "I am going to Amber Ridge." Eli said, "I know." He said, "I don't know what I am going to find." Eli said, "Yes, you do." Garrett looked at his son for a moment. He nodded once. He got up and found his coat. Amber Ridge had changed over 20 years in the ways that frontier towns change, gradually and then suddenly, and then in ways that you notice only when you have been away long enough to see the difference. Garrett rode in on a Thursday morning, and the town received him the way towns receive people who have been gone a long time, with the mild curiosity of a place that has continued without you and is not entirely certain what your return signifies. He went to the Holt property. Maverick was old now and moved through the house with the careful deliberateness of a man who has outlived most of his certainties and has made a practical peace with the ones that remain. He opened the door and looked at Garrett Cade, standing on his porch, 20 years older than the last time he had been there, and he said, "I wondered." He stepped aside and let him in. Clara was in the sitting room. Of course Clara was in the sitting room. She had been told Garrett was coming because Eli had sent word ahead, and Clara had arranged to be present because she had been managing the situation for 20 years, and she was not going to miss its resolution. She looked at Garrett and said, "Sit down." He sat. She said, "She is in the garden." She paused. "She has kept the letters." He looked at Clara for a moment. She looked back with the composed expression of a woman who has been waiting 20 years to say something and has finally said it, and is now going to let events proceed at their own pace. Ada was told there was someone in the sitting room. The person who told her did not say who it was, because Clara had arranged for the information to be delivered without a name attached, which was either wisdom or a final small cruelty, depending on your perspective. And Ada came through the garden door into the kitchen and stopped. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Garrett Cade sitting at the table in her father's house, and she did the specific calculation of a woman who has been carrying a number for 20 years and has just been handed the other number it was always waiting to be added to. He stood. He had the diary in his hands. He did not know how to begin, and so he did what he had always done, which was to begin with the plain truth and let it do the work. He said, "I read it." She looked at the diary. Then she looked at him. She said, "I know." He said, "I know you know." He meant she had always known what was in it, even without reading it. She said, "Yes." He said, "Ada." She waited. He said, "The letters." She looked at the diary in his hands. She said, "Yes." He said, "All of them." She said, "Every one." He said, "The things you wrote." His voice was not entirely steady. She said, "I meant every word. Every single word from the first letter to the last." He set the diary on the table between them. He looked at her. She looked at him. They were 51 and 49 years old, and there were 20 years between them, and a cedar box of letters, and a dead woman's diary, and a son standing in the doorway behind his father, and a father sitting in the back of the house who had been waiting for this particular reckoning longer than anyone had asked him to wait, and a woman named Clara sitting in the sitting room who had been managing the story for 2 decades and had done it well, and was now prepared to let it finish without her assistance. He said, "I would like to read them again, if you still have them." She said, "I have every one." He said, "I thought so." She almost smiled. He almost smiled back. It was the smile of two people standing at the beginning of something they should have had 20 years ago, who are not going to waste the fact that they are standing at it now. Eli came through the door behind his father and looked at Ada Holt for the first time and understood that this was the woman who had written the letters that his father had fallen in love with before his father knew her face. And he thought about his mother's diary and the love his mother had documented and the apology his mother had written to this woman who would probably never read it. And he looked at Ada and said, she was sorry. Ada looked at the young man with his father's eyes. She said, I know she was. He said, she loved him. Ada said, I know that too. Eli nodded once. He sat down at the table, and Clara came from the sitting room with tea, because Clara always produced tea at the correct moment. And Maverick came from the back of the house, moving carefully, and sat in his chair and accepted a cup with the dignity of a man who has waited long enough for something that he is not going to rush it now that it has arrived. The cedar box came down from Ada's room and was placed on the kitchen table beside the diary, and the two of them sat across from each other with the full accounting of everything that had happened between them and around them and because of them spread out on the table, and they began. Not quickly, not with any sense that the 20 years could be compressed, or that the beginning they were making was the same as the beginning they had missed, but genuinely, with the specific honesty that had characterized every letter in that cedar box, the honesty of two people speaking without performance to someone they cannot see clearly enough to perform for, and finding that what they had been in those letters was still what they were, and that was the thing that had survived everything done to it, because it was built from something real, and real things have a durability that nothing else quite matches. Outside, Amber Ridge went about its business in the way frontier towns go about their business in October, steadily and without drama, with the specific golden light laying long across the ridgeline, and the morning holding its warmth against the coming cold, and the letters on the table between two people who had always been the answer to each other's question, reading as clearly as they had the first time they were written, which was completely and honestly and with the whole heart. If this story found you somewhere tonight, I want to know where. Drop your city in the comments below. It matters more than you know how far a story travels. And if something in Garrett and Ada's story stayed with you, the letters, the platform, the diary, the moment she said, I meant every word, leave that too. There are more stories waiting, each one a different distance, a different frontier, a different love that survived everything that was done to it, because it was built from something real.